Hey viewers, so we are planning to head to Maryland in a couple of weeks, October 10th to the 14th, to the United States Sailboat Show. So this is a sailboat show preview. We're going to quickly go through some of the boats that we're tending to look at, and this is going to be a two-part thing. This is part one, where we're going to look at catamarans, and part two, we're going to go through the monohulls that we're going to look at, because we want to look at both. So what we did was went through the exhibitors. We click on this up here. Here we go. We look at boats. So we just sorted through the boat manufacturers by who was making what and the types and sizes that we wanted to see. So for this video, we are going to go through and look at the different catamarans that we picked out. So we made a list of all the different catamarans that we thought we would want to go and take a look at. There's some obvious ones and there's some ones that surprise us we'd never even heard of before. So this is going to be our way out in the future boat, because it's tough to put in a slip affordably. You're typically going to have to use a double slip for these, which is probably going to be pretty expensive, unless you can somehow find a unicorn mooring. And in our parts, that's unlikely to happen. State moorings are a good 20 to 30 year waiting list on some of them, and you can rent a mooring from some of the marinas. That is a possibility, but they're not all that much cheaper than getting a slip. So let's go through the list real quick. So number one, the Antares. Antares 44 is going to be on display, or so we're told. So we're interested in taking a look at this boat. This has some interesting features. They proclaim themselves as a liveaboard. We kind of like the rain gutters that collect rainwater, so you can have some fresh water off of that if you filter it well. But we're curious to see what's going to go on with this. It's an interesting looking boat. Next on the list is the Balance 526, another really interesting boat, a really expensive boat, in the higher end of these boats that we're going to look at. But there's actually been one of these locally. Someone in Dover, New Hampshire has one of these. I believe it's called Dragonfly. It was in the harbor last year and left just before the boat show last year. So, and I think it was on display at the boat show last year. But the 526 is a pretty interesting boat. Has some interesting helm features with a wheel that drops down. It's supposedly a fast boat and fairly comfortable. Somewhat small internals, as is typical with the more performance models. But we're excited to go take a walk around this one and see what it looks like for ourselves. Then there's Bali. There's actually going to be, I think, 3 or 4 different Bali catamarans on display. Let me check the list notes here. There's 4 different Bali, 4.1, 4.3, 4.5, and the 5.4 on display. So these will be interesting to take a look at. Don't really know too much about them, and we're happy to report back on anything that we find out about these. So there's the 4.1, 4.3, a little bit bigger. It's all in meters. Sorry, I can't think in meters just yet. It'll come. And 4.5. Nice looking boats. Oh, they all look good in the pictures. So here's the Bali 5.4. Looks like I never finished clicking through to the 5.4 and probably the next one too. This appears to be their largest of the sailing catamarans. Neat thing on the Bali is this big garage door back. So this whole door in the back flips down and seals off the whole inside. So you've got like an inside-outside thing going on. Nice that you can have your whole inside become the outside, but it's also a bad when it's inclement weather. You end up with nothing as a outdoor area when that's closed. Next one is the Katana 53. I think the Katana falls more on the performance size. It's some really high freeboard on these. I don't know a whole lot about these, so it'll be interesting to find out. This is on the larger side, 53 feet. Next we go on to the Fountain Pajot French boats. And I've been interested to see these, even though I've heard some things about, despite being very pretty boats and well laid out or thought out, maybe not as well built as some of the others. Maybe well built isn't the right term. Maybe it's quality of components might be a better statement. But I'm interested to go and see these. This is listed on the show website as the new 45, and if you look at the URL up here, it says new 45, but apparently they've decided to call it the Elba, and we're wondering if that's going to be on the stickers on the boat that's at the show. Next up is the Estrella 42. This is one they've had for a little bit, 42 foot, a little bit smaller. And then they have the Lucia 40, which is, I think, maybe the smallest of their line at the moment. They used to have some 38s and things, but yeah, according to the menu at the top here, that's currently their smallest offering. The Saona 47, I think this is going to be the largest of the Fountain Pajot boats that we see at the show this year. There's a Saba 50, which has a pretty cool layout. That's been out for a couple of years and fairly high demand. I'm curious why they don't have any of those. Maybe it's because it's such high demand that everybody's out sailing them and they couldn't get any customers to bring them back and show them off. So the next one is an interesting boat, is the Gemini, or Gemini, depending on whether you're a NASA person or not. The Gemini boats, Gemini, traditionally been kind of, I don't want to say cheesy looking, and some semi-cheesy features. You know, like a semi-stern drive kind of setup that was custom with a long leg on it in the middle instead of two motors. Some of them I think had outboard motors in the sugar scoops. I think the current Legacy 35 has a proper inboard motor, so we'll go and check that out at the show. Where the price point supposedly is fairly low, but when you go through and look at the used boats, the price difference between a used one of these and a used, you know, Leopard or something isn't huge by a percentage wise. It's big in dollar numbers. You know, you're talking like, you know, maybe it's you know, $10,000-$20,000 different, but when you're talking about a $150,000-$200,000 boat, as percentage wise, it's not. Maybe you want to go and get something more traditional and has some better aesthetics as far as I'm concerned, but that's to each his own. Next one up is and I'm not sure how you pronounce this, but it might be Nysnay or Kinsnay, K-N-Y-S-N-A-Y, or Kinsna. Yeah, it's just an A at the end, Kinsna, or Nysna. But I hadn't heard of this one really until I started looking through the show listings. This is a somewhat larger boat. It's a 50-foot catamaran. And we're curious to see what this one's all about. It looks pretty good, like most of them do from the photos. The layouts are interesting. Somewhat narrower hulls, I believe. Should make it a little bit faster. They've got this little bit of marketing say, look, we're all sold out all the way out through next year. Which I think is not unusual for any of the manufacturers. They don't pump these things out by the hundreds. So, on to the next, and we're into the lagoons. There's going to be a big showing of lagoons. They have one of almost every smaller size, starting with the 40. Next up, the 42, the 450, So I think the 450 was the one that wasn't clear which model they were going to have. There's actually a 450S and a 450F, as in Frank. But the show list doesn't specify which version is going to be on display. So I'm kind of curious to see what we end up with. The 46 is going to be on display. The 50 is going to be on display. And the giant 77 is supposedly on display, going to be on display at the show. That's just gargantuan. I'm not sure. I'd never say never, but not sure I'd even want a boat that big. It seems awkward to bring in anywhere. The 50s seems about right, but you know, maybe you'd want the 77 if you're getting out in nasty weather. But then again, those are some big sails to manage and lines to manage, etc. So without a crew, that starts to get interesting, I think. Of course, most of these are push-button operation these days, electric furling, and so on and so forth. So on to the Leopard Catamarans. The Leopard is the other famous, one of the, I'd say the top three, most famous three of the catamaran brands in the production area is Leopard, Fountain Pajot, and Lagoon. A lot of people don't like the Lagoons. Let's see if we can pull one up real quick because of their window style. You can see it here. These vertical windows make for a very pop-top looking salon, which is done on purpose. It keeps the sun out. It's got an overhang, so it's quite functional, and it also gives you a very large salon area without these sweeping windows coming back. You can go bring your furniture right up to the window and have a lot of floor space for the amount of roof space that you have. The Leopards, and here's the 40. They're going to have 3 different sizes on display. 40, the 45, which is not even going to be out till next year, so I'm not sure exactly how they're going to have that on display. Maybe they've got a demo prototype boat ready. But a lot of these Leopards now have these, what people are referring to as bathtubs in the front, which makes a lot of people, including myself, a bit nervous. They claim fairly high drainage rates, but if you're in heavy weather and the surf is coming over the front, you can add a couple thousand pounds easily of weight to the front of this boat in a heartbeat. And you know, calculating the drainage time, I think it was 5-10 seconds to dump that. But rough seas, you can have a period of waves that's less than that, so you could be refilling that bathtub quite quickly, and putting all that weight in the front is going to dip the nose down even more to cause it to fill up faster. I can see that being a really cool place to hang out. Nice having a second outdoor area under the hardtop, looking forward while you're underway, seeing where you're going as opposed to sitting out back seeing where you've been. But I don't know. I can be convinced. I've got an open mind about it. We'll see what they get to say. And lastly, in the Leopard line is the Leopard 50, a big yacht on the larger end of. I mean, it's about where we want to be. With a catamaran, you can go quite a bit smaller and get a ton of space. So even though the 50 might feel better for being out in the open water, you don't really need it to get space like you do with a monohull. All right, and on to the next one. This is a new one that I hadn't heard of again. This is the Maverick, Maverick 440. So really curious to see this one in person. Had never heard of it until we looked through these show listings. One of the interesting features about this boat is that they promote it being beachable and designed for beaching. Some specially designed bottom sections for beaching this. So interested to see what that looks like in person. Next one, EType. I believe this is a subsidiary of Bavaria Yachts. Let's say that down here if we go to the details. And they don't call it out. Pretty sure this is a sub company, a subsidiary of Bavaria. Thought I read that. But these are interesting. Very exposed helm stations. So for a boat that Diana and I would expect to potentially retire on and sail around the world, I'm not sure these really open exposed helm positions make sense to us. Like to go see it, see what it's all about. Like I said, trying to keep an open mind, not make smart decisions. But there's going to be two ETypes, the 40 Open and the 46 Open, on display. You get to walk around on both. They both kind of have the same general design ideas. This one has a really tall roof. We're in a different boat now. 46 Open. Yeah, so they're very similar to the 40, just longer. I think it still has the same general layout of open exposed helm stations. We'll probably drag canvas over it somehow, but it looks a bit awkward. All right, moving on. Lutra, another French ship, boat. These are famous for being fast, high-speed daggerboard type catamarans, and it's certainly appealing to think that you could go twice as fast across a passage. If you're crossing the Pacific and it takes you 2 weeks instead of 4 or 3, or less, that's rather compelling. You do lose a lot of space in the hulls. These are very tight. They're 45. You don't get walk around bunks. They're quite narrow. So you do lose a lot of space below, and you do lose a lot of space above. You look how far these, we used to call these pickle forks back in the day. Sponsons, pontoons. The hulls stick out quite a bit further than the cabin line. So you lose quite a bit of salon area, and you can just see it from this picture how quickly you hit the front of the salon there. It's laid out more of left port to starboard than it is anything else. It's a kind of a passage down to the lower hulls, and I can't remember if these should be galley up. It's another thing I'm interested to see more for myself is galley up versus galley down. There's a couple of boats here that are like that. The Gemini is a galley down, and there's another one we'll get to. So here's the Privilege. They have a kind of a crummy website. Privilege is supposedly got the Privilege 500 on display at the show, but when you go to choose your Privilege, that's not an option. You got a 510, a 580, 6 series, 7 series. I've heard of a 5 series, I think. That's a power catamaran. But if you type it in, you get this Privilege 5. It appears to be just a blog post of somebody launching their Privilege 500, I think this year. So you can see some of it, but like I said, kind of a crummy website. A lot of pictures of people rather than the boat. But Privilege is supposedly a higher end cruising style catamaran, so not necessarily performance, not known for speed, but luxurious. So we'll see the Privilege there. And next, this is another new one I had never heard of. So this is the Royal Cape Catamarans. Majestic 53 is what it was called on the Annapolis sailing page, but it's actually a 530 according to their website. So this one's, I did read a little bit, and the first thing that struck out at me is it's still a balsa cord boat. As you may learn in getting to know us better, I'm anti-wood. We've had boats for decades and decades. Grew up, grandfather was a shipbuilder, father built a boat, and most of them had some sort of wood in them. The only ones that we still have had no wood in them. Our Sunray Junior is still down at Family Lake House, and it's still seaworthy, and well, I can't say there's not a drop of wood. At the top of the centerboard case is wood, and there's a plywood sheet that goes across the floor to make it flat and not the curve of the bottom. Those are the only bits of wood in that besides the mast. But the hull in general, in majority, is all fiberglass and still quite functional. You know, our O'Day 23 that we have now has balsa core, and a lot of it's soft, a lot of it's rotten. I think in the spring we're probably going to try one of the foam injection systems to stiffen that back up before we try and fill in cracks and things that are up there to pretty her up. But this boat is, as I said, as I read through it, is still a balsa cord, whereas most of the others have moved on to a synthetic material, foam of some sort, which makes so much more sense. It's a much longer durable, higher durability product, longer lived. I shouldn't expect that it to rot. There are some issues sometimes with foams, but I think modern foams have a much more resilient characteristic to them than older foams that used to suffer some crushing issues, especially after they got a little bit old. So the fear, I think, was that if you had foam between two layers of fiberglass and you stepped on it, every time you stepped on it you might crush that foam down a little bit, and eventually you'd get a depression there and a delamination. But I suspect that's been taken care of these days. So the next entrant is the Seawind 1260. I had heard of this, but recently learned about it. The Seawind Catamarans, I believe, come from Australia and are well talked about. And I believe the Seawind is one of the galley down boats. Let's take a quick look, see if we can pull that real fast. Look at these three cabins. Yeah, so this is a galley down type arrangement. A faster boat. It's fairly narrow hulled. I don't think it's a centerboard model. I think it's a daggerboard rather. I believe these are keeled, unless there's an option for that. So let's move on. There's going to be one Seawind size there, the 1260. The next one was another interesting one I'd never heard of and hard to find and get information on. Is the St. Francis Catamarans. If you Google St. Francis Catamarans, their website does not come up. They do not rank for their own name. So not much SEO going on for them, but you do get to their Facebook page pretty easily, and then from their Facebook page you can scroll down and find a URL to get to their main website. So the St. Francis 50 MK2, I believe, is what's going to be on display. We're looking forward to seeing what this one's all about. Really don't know much about it at all. Just learned about it from looking through the list of boats that's going to be on display for the show. And then lastly, but not least, a fairly new entrant to the world of cruising catamarans is the exquisite yachts. There are a couple different sizes, but the X5 sail is what's going to be on display. Looking forward to seeing this one. It's got some interesting features. It's talked about well by, of course, the dealers who are starting to carry them, but it has this really big fiberglass arch over the cabin, not over the cockpit, sorry, with a weird tunnel. And that seems like it's going to be a headroom problem as people are walking through it. Sorry about all the stinking notifications popping up. I thought I had turned that off. So there we go. So that's the lineup for the catamarans. Like I said, we're going to do a phase 2 where we're going to go through the monohulls that we're going to be taking a look at. Because that's probably going to be the type of boat that we get into before we get into a catamaran. A monohull's going to be easier for us to deal with in the short term while we still have jobs and kids, and keep at a slip or a mooring locally. We've kind of fallen in love with an older boat. We've seen the Hunter 450 and 456. They're almost, as far as I can tell, they're identical apart from sail area and some slight variances in length on waterline. They say same mast height, same overall length, etc. Same displacement, same ballast. So same layout. Laid the two layouts from their brochures over the top of each other, and you can't see any difference between the two. But we really like those. But those have turned us on to the center cockpits, so we are going to hunt down a bunch of those. But we'll talk about that more on the next episode, where we talk about the monohulls. Talk to you then. Bye.